About 10 years ago, we had some pub events happening in the Trinity community, and Dr. Tierney was there for a student Q&A open forum, and I remember him getting up and saying these two words: "People move." And I looked at him and I said, "What? Like, come on, man! Like, we need like a good, life-giving word, and all you give us is people move." And since then, I've realized what a pregnant, deeply meaningful phrase those two words mean. People move. It is a basic fact, and has been true from the beginning of our human existence, that people move. Adam and Eve moved. Cain moved. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, all moved. Every movement raises new questions about belonging. We see this most vividly in God's call to Abraham. Go from your country, which is a comment about the land that he's on, your people, which is a comment about group belonging, and your father's household, which is a comment about family, to the land I will show you. The movement of people in the modern world has also led to new questions about where people belong. Where is home? Where are you from? Sociologists Stephen Cornell and Douglas Hartman argue that in recent decades it has become apparent that ethnicity and race are among the most common categories that contemporary human beings use to organize their ideas about who they are, to evaluate their experiences and behavior, and to understand the world around them. In other words, ethnicity and race are among some of the most fundamental organizing concepts of the contemporary world. So a sociological analysis about belonging, about us versus them, must include an analysis of the concept of ethnicity and race. I'm sure that it is not lost upon us that in present-day United States, the concept of ethnicity and race, put race in quotation marks, are especially salient in the discussion of who belongs here. I believe that when it comes to ethnicity and race, I want to suggest that there are two questions that we must constantly interrogate. One, what constitutes an ethnic group or race? What characteristics define the essence of an ethnic or racial group? The second question is this: what is the nature of boundaries for an ethnic or racial group? And are these boundaries fixed or fluid? And to what extent are these boundaries maintained? We understand that an ethnic group or a race as a group of people are a group of people that share common characteristics that include common descent or a belief in the common descent, and therefore blood ties and physical characteristics, national origin, language, religion, or other patterns of belief and behavior, and that these characteristics are immutable and are able to be passed down in its purest forms from one generation to the next, then the nativist understanding of belonging makes sense. As a group of people who belong in this land, we share the following physical, linguistic, and cultural features. And these features will always exist from the beginning, and therefore, to be part of this group, one must also share the same features. On the other hand, we understand an ethnic group or race as a group of people that share common characteristics, but that these characteristics are more symbolic. It's just an epitome of one's peoplehood. And that there can be varying degrees of adherence, ascription, and practice. And that our understanding of common descent is more by reputation instead of physical. That we can share in memories of historical past. And that therefore these characteristics are fluid with porous boundaries. And the more flexible understanding of who belongs makes sense. We can claim the same history. We can claim the same geographical territory. We can hold the same values. We can hold the same ideals. And though we may not look the same physically, though we may not speak the same language, and though we may not even have the same similar cultural practices or food, the fact that these markers are fluid and are constantly changing mean that they in and of themselves are not sufficient markers of separations. Cornell and Hartman, in fact, argue that To claim an ethnic or racial identity is in and of itself an attempt to distinguish ourselves from others. It is to draw a boundary between us and them on the basis that we are together, we share something that they do not. One of the most influential theorists that that's influenced my thought is a scholar by the name of Frederick Barth, who said, the identification of another person as a fellow member of an ethnic group implies a sharing of criteria for evaluation and judgment, that we're playing the same game. On the other hand, recognition of an individual as a member of another group implies that between us, there's a limitation of shared understanding, differences in criteria for judgment, performance, and mutual interests. So what does this mean? I want to, before I move to kind of give some reflection about our current context, I want to just leave with a few observations from Barth. One, it seems that ethnic boundaries persist despite movement from people groups. Look at this room. People move, but ethnic boundaries persist. Isolation and absence of contact are not necessary for the maintenance of boundaries. We suggest that for racial groups and ethnic groups to maintain boundaries, there are active processes of inclusion and exclusion at work. What are those processes? If movement itself does not change group boundaries, it seems that intergroup interactions and relationships also do not lessen the fixity of group boundaries. Group boundaries seem to continue, not just when interactions exist, but even when interdependence exists. So for example, the Department of Health and Human Services found that refugees brought in $63 billion more in government revenues over the past decade than they cost, according to a report in the New York Times. To what extent should such a report influence our understanding of who belongs? And then probably the third thing, it begs the question, why do boundaries exist? You know, logic suggests that as people interact, as they participate in life together, you find common ground and similarities, and so your commonality would increase and differences would decrease. And it works on a friendship level, right? We find common interests, common food, common language, common behaviors that allow for intercultural friendships and maybe even even intercultural marriages. But at a macro level, you can see this place like the United Kingdom. Fernando talked about it last week in chapel in Sri Lanka. Some may argue that interaction, rather than decreasing group boundaries, in fact, will lead to strengthening of group boundaries. And I think for some of us, and maybe this is just me, the advice that the initial steps to reconciliation is friendship, while true, seem insufficient. It's true, but it's not satisfactory. Barth suggests that perhaps part of this is because there is a structure of interaction that allows society to maintain group boundaries. That there are a systematic set of rules that govern inter-ethnic social encounters. What is considered acceptable in any particular social situation. In other words, there are rules that dictate what is acceptable in the public square. And as long as those rules are observed and upheld by all, then inter-ethnic interaction can take place peacefully. But the moment those rules are challenged, then the moment those group boundaries become blurred, and the inter-ethnic interaction actually poses an existential threat to a group's self-definition. Robert Park, a sociologist at the University of Chicago in the 1920s, suggested that the end cycle of immigration is assimilation. Right? His theory has since been proven to be inadequate. It captured well the process of assimilation for the Irish, Italians, Germans, Polish, and to some extent the Jews in the United States. But it has not adequately captured the experiences of Africans, Asians, and Hispanics. Why? If Bart, Cornell, and Hartman are right, that a claim to ethnicity is in and of itself an exercise in distinguishing between us and them, and I wonder if the inadequacy of Park's theory can be explained by his oversight of a claim to a particular group identity that is unique, that is a unique invention in the United States. A claim to white identity. Before I go on, let me say what I'm not trying to do. Okay, I had to do this a lot in my dissertation work. I try to remind people, when they come, I'm trying to interview about whiteness and white identity and the differences of white identity and so on and so forth. I have a picture of my family behind me. And my wife is Swedish, German. She's blonde hair, blue eye. Here are my kids. Okay, so I'm not here trying to make you feel bad about being white. I'm not trying to bash white people and to fault you for every evil in the world. Okay, my responsibility as a father is to steward both the white identity and the Asian identity of my children, with all the challenges and privileges that are contained within those identities. What I'm trying to suggest, however, is that unless we intentionally reflect on what constitutes white identity, especially if it is a marker of belonging in our country, we will forever talk past one another because we cannot agree on the systematic rules that govern inter-ethnic relationship. So here's what I want to say. Again, as part of my dissertation, not to chop up, I would not get out in like 50 minutes. So let me just say something very briefly, and it's not going to be sufficient. Hopefully it will be helpful for us today, but we can talk more. White identity is an invention unique to the United States. The notion of white identity actually grew out of the labor supply problems in the Jamestown War. In the beginning, the overwhelming sentiment of the European bondservants was actually to stand in solidarity with their African bondservants and enslaved Africans. And this all changed when Nathaniel Bacon led an uprising of indentured Europeans, endangered Africans, and enslaved Africans against the wealthy ruling class in Virginia. The white ruling class, the landowners, the bourgeoisie, in light of what they see as a destabilizing force by the partnership between the working class, systemically created an identity of whiteness in order to loosen the bonds of solidarity between whites and non-whites in the colonies. And they did so by forbidding land ownership, marriage for non-whites, intermarriage between whites and non-whites, and ultimately ownership of weapons and the ability to vote. What scholars have noted is that what it created for the European bondservants is that they received a psychological wage from identifying as white that aligns them more with the white ruling class than the mutual shared economic interests of their fellow bondservants and enslaved Africans. And this boundaries of white identity has been maintained over time in the United States. The Irish, when they first came, were not considered white. They took jobs coded as black. They lived with African Americans. They were together in a community. The same happened, not to quite to the same extent, with the Italians, and most recently the Jews. The Jews is fascinating because they, of all people, lived through pogroms and concentration camp and know what it feels like to be an oppressed people group. But post-World War II, they were being embraced. And they realized that if they identified as white, they would have access to the highest rank of society, economically and politically. But I think as we saw in the most recent white supremacy rallies, the Jews are not considered white. For many whites who immigrated from Europe to the United States prior to the current migration, becoming white required them to give up their ethnic history. There's a book by Tim Wise called White Like Me. So this is what he reflected on. Don't seem too Jewish. Don't teach your children the language of their forebears nor the customs. Don't talk about the old country. Pull all that behind you and become a new man, a white man. It means giving up all meaningful, cultural, personal, and communal attributes that once kept our peoples alive in Europe and during our journeys here. We have customs, tradition, music, and culture and style, things to be celebrated, cultivated, and passed down to future generations. And he said, when they came, those things were asked, they were told to leave all this behind. And the result, he said, he noted, is for Europeans to stand denuded before a culture that has stolen your birthright, or rather convinced you to give it up. The costs are formidable, beginning with the emptiness whites so often feel when confronted by multiculturalism, and the connectedness of the people of color to their various heritages. Unless you think that Tim Weiss is simply a white person who's trying to rationalize his own sense of defensiveness and disequilibrium, it's worth pointing out that it was James Baldwin himself who noted, "It bears terrifying witness to what happened to everyone who got here and paid the price of the ticket. The price was to become white. No one was white before he or she came to America. It took generations and a vast amount of coercion before this became a white country." Truthfully, some personal reflection. I don't know if I've ever belonged. Many of you know that I was born and grew up in Indonesia. My maternal grandmother was from the southern part of China. She moved to Indonesia because a wealthy Chinese businessman from Indonesia came to her village to search for her wife. Came to her village, picked her up, and she moved to Indonesia. And we never met this gentleman or know any Indonesian. He did so because he wanted to marry a Chinese to keep the ethnicity pure. My paternal grandparents moved from China to Indonesia post-World War II, but other than that, we didn't really know much about our family history. As a Chinese family in Indonesia, we didn't belong. There was much ethnic tension between the Chinese and the Indonesians. The Chinese tend to be of higher socioeconomic class than the Indonesians. So it is not uncommon, for example, for the Chinese to hire Indonesians to be nannies, drivers, house workers. In Indonesia, the fact that you were born there didn't give you citizenship. So for the first 9 years of my life, I actually held Chinese citizenship, and my last name was Chu, my Chinese last name. So despite the fact that my parents, my brother, and I were all born there, we were all still considered Chinese citizens. When my parents decided to move to Taiwan to pursue theological education, we thought it would be better for us to apply for Indonesian citizenship so we could come back and visit our relatives, and my grandmother, who's still alive now. So in order for us to get Indonesian citizenship, we had to change our last name from Chu to Theonugraha. There are 7 of us in the world with that last name. When we moved to Taiwan, despite our pure Chinese descent, we were considered to be overseas-born Chinese or Indonesian-born Chinese. After all, we were not born in a Chinese territory. I learned how to speak Mandarin, learned how to use chopsticks, and learned the national anthem in order to belong. When you moved to the United States, of course, you go through the moments of exclusions that you experience as an immigrant. In Taiwan was in vogue to wear your socks up to your knees. So imagine my first day of school in 7th grade, middle school, showing up to school with short shorts and socks up to my knees. Right? I learned within the first 10 minutes to not do that ever again. We were considered to be immigrants, like the Americans, but even among the Chinese, we were considered to be OBC, overseas-born Chinese, instead of ABC, American-born Chinese. My parents' Chinese was considered to be less than pure because they spoke Chinese with an Indonesian accent. And when other Chinese wanted to be derogatory, they referred to us as Indonesians rather than Chinese. Last week we talked about parts of our identity that we're willing to negotiate away, or maybe things that we shouldn't negotiate away. For my family, that was marriage. My parents insisted that I marry a Chinese woman. Before I left for seminary, 2 of the church elders came and urged me to go back to Taiwan to find a good Chinese wife. It was actually harder for me to receive my family's blessing to marry Esther rather than it was for me to receive her family's blessing to marry her. And I reflected on this. I wondered if perhaps my parents were racist. My dad's a pastor. My mom and my dad both went to Bible college, seminary. Maybe this is too generous of a reading of the situation. But the moment everything changed for my parents was when I visited Pittsburgh to be with Esther's family for spring break. When I came back, my dad asked me if everything went well and if they accepted me. And I said, my good looks, is that an issue? So my dad said, so all that's left then is for us to meet Esther. I was shocked. I wondered in that moment if the resistance to me marrying outside my group is out of fear that I won't be accepted in the white world. This is nothing new. For most of you who immigrated, you know that the experience of belonging is many layered. We are all trying to integrate to this country with all these dynamics of attitudes or immigrants, but among your own in-group, your ethnic group, you also experience the inter-ethnic dynamics of your whole country. Belonging becomes incredibly elusive. Just want to share with two final thoughts. When Isaiah was born, my wife came up with a song. She wrote a new verse, to the song "This Land Is My Land." And this is what it says. I'm part Swedish and part Chinese. I'm all American. Can I have some milk, please? I love my mommy. I love my daddy. This land was made just for me. Another thing in my journey that I've thought about is that perhaps rather than asking questions about who belongs and where we belong, on a personal, individual level, okay, not on a collective level, but for us individually as Christians, I wonder if the best thing we can do for ourselves is to ask ourselves, to remind ourselves, to whom do we belong? Understanding that we belong to God without diminishing our conception of self that has been constructed and informed by our localities, and they cannot be separated, gives us hope in moments of exclusions and guards our souls against the temptation of nativism.